Hola y bienvenidos a una nueva entrevista en el Ufology para códigooculto.com y el canal de YouTube a Enigma. Y como veis, estamos en tándem en esta vuelta porque entre José Antonio y yo vamos a hacerle una entrevista a Whitley Strieber. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. So from now on, the interview is going to be in English and I will add subtitles. So for questions, first question, sir. Cuz your experiences and work are one of the most important and have had a profound impact in the public's perception of the UFO phenomena. But for our younger audience, could you please describe as a kind of condensed way what happened? What are your earliest recollections of your experiences?
Yes. Well, I think the best thing to start is the experiences I had in adulthood. I had some as a child, but I don't remember them very well. As an adult in December of 1985, just after Christmas, I had I woke up in a very strange situation. I was not in my room and not in my house. I was in a little, what I thought was a tent, and it was probably a UFO, but at the time I didn't think about things like that. I had no idea of that. And so it was a small room, and there was something very strange in the room with me, this being with thin arms and very big eyes, black eyes, did not look like a human being. And I was thinking I was having a nightmare. I didn't think it was anything real. But then I couldn't wake up, and the harder I tried to wake up, the more I could see others in the room, different shapes. And that was the beginning, because I had I had this last encounter, and afterwards, the next day, I couldn't figure out why I was so distressed and upset. And over the next few days, I remembered it more clearly, and I thought I was going crazy. So I went to the doctor, and gradually over the next month or so, it became obvious that it had really happened. And I've been working on this ever since.
I see. What's the emotional impact of that?
Well, it was devastating. I had stress disorder from it, and I was also physically abused. I received injuries, and I was. It just really overturned my life and my family life too, completely, because at first I thought I was going mad or had a brain tumor or something. The doctor examined me and gave me all kinds of different tests, and eventually the only thing that was wrong was that I had stress and I was injured. So it was hard, very hard.
I guess. Contame.
Que él está hablando del impacto que tiene después de su experiencia de la realidad física,
Sí.
hablar también de la realidad física, que es lo que destacaría de las consecuencias de su experiencia.
What's the physical impact on your reality after that? What would you say what was the most important consequence of this on the physical reality?
In the physical, you mean like physical injuries and things, or in my understanding of the physical world?
¿Te refieres a...?
Sí, en él y también en el terreno, porque yo entendí que su primera experiencia dio una huella sobre el terreno, que también hubo unas luces.
Oh, okay. He's speaking about physical traces because he understands you've seen some tracks on the ground and some physical proof that happened.
Oh, yeah, there was plenty of that. first I was injured badly, and the injury was treated by doctors, and I struggled with it for 20 years. It was not something that went away quickly because it was an internal injury. And then over time, my wife, once she understood what had happened, she really became the one to organize everything. And we had friends up the cabin. We had a little cabin in New York in the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
And they would see them too. They would come up to the cabin, these beings would, and they were not friendly, but they weren't unfriendly either. And it was really quite interesting. There were many incidents like that. We had at least over the years, a dozen people or more encountered them at the cabin. So, and I've written about these people. Their names are in my books. They were agreed to be named. And so it's clear that something happened. Quite clear.
Would you use the word trauma for what happened to you?
Yes.
You felt traumatized.
Yeah. At first, it was very traumatic because, as I said, I had a physical injury. I was raped, actually, and the injury was severe. And so it was very traumatic for that to happen to anyone, and a man, and it was very humiliating. It was awful. I've only recently even begun to be able to talk about it at all. So the struggle with stress and trauma afterwards was intense. I went through traumatic rehabilitation programs and things, so forth.
And that helps you cope with it.
Well, that and them. I mean, I also, my wife and I, when we realized it had really happened and that these were not human beings, we didn't know what they were, and I still don't know. I mean, people all say they're aliens from another planet, but how do we know? We don't know. I can only tell you what I saw and experienced. I never went to any other planet, so I don't know what.
Well, the rest of it is a speculation.
Yeah, exactly. It's a speculation. But in any case, they're real. And that made us think, well, we can't just turn away from this. And so I kept trying, especially to understand it. And I would go out into the woods at night on my own to let them know that I was ready to re-engage with them, in spite of all that had happened, in spite of how hard it was. And they did started coming back to the cabin. They came back into our lives, and they remained in our lives for many years.
I can't believe you did that. That's really
Well,
brave.
you know, my wife, Anne, was a very strong person, and when we talked about it, she said, you know, Whitley, we can't turn away from it because this is amazing. It's extraordinary. And, you know, and I said, well, you know, I don't want to go through that again. And she said, but we have to try to make this make sense somehow. And I said, well, then let's go down in the woods at night. And she said, well, you go down in the woods at night. I have to stay here at the cabin to take care of our little boy. And, you know, I did meet with them a number of times and had just very different experiences from the first time. And it was not bad. It became very remarkable. And I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I said, I'm not just going to hide from this. I'm going to take it on.
Dime.
sobre la aceptación del trauma, que comenta de la primera experiencia que le supuso a él el apoyo de Bahaki y los grupos de otras personas que tienen experiencias similares a la suya.
About coping with the trauma, the question is, how did Bud Hopkins and all people who had similar experiences as yours, how did that help you? So.
De no saberse unir, de no saber.
That not feeling you were the only one going through this.
Well, at first, I eventually met a man who investigated this sort of thing called Bud Hopkins.
Yeah.
And he introduced me to other people who had had the experience. And some of them were like me. They wanted to, despite the difficulty of how frightening it was at first, they wanted to know more. Others wanted it out of their lives forever. And so, and that was good because, I got to meet other people who had had the experience. And we thought, at the time, Bud thought there was a couple hundred people who had had this experience. We didn't think it was very many. And I wrote a book called Communion about the experience because I wanted to get down on paper everything that I remembered that had happened. And the book sold enormous numbers of copies all over the world. And we got hundreds of thousands of letters from people who had had similar experiences from all over the world. And no one realized that was the case, that this is not an uncommon experience. It's a common experience that people hide because it's embarrassing and, they get laughed at, or people can lose their jobs, or their marriages can be broken up. All kinds of things happen to people when they make a statement about something like this. And yet they're out there now. I'm happy to say my wife saved all of the letters that had detailed descriptions of the experiences, and they are housed in a university archive in Texas in the United States at Rice University now. And they're treated with great respect, and I'm glad of that.
That's really interesting.
Y bueno, y para terminar el tema de Bahaki, ¿qué puede decir de todo lo que se hablaba de que tenían divergencias por el asunto de que él se alejó un poco de la hipótesis extraterrestre y tenía una visión más amplia del fenómeno? Sí, su relación.
Le quieres preguntar también si tenían pelo o no, eso que hablamos. Dime.
Su relación con Hawkins sí se vio deteriorada con el tema de que él ya no pensaba tanto.
Okay, so, Kes, we understand that you and Bud Hopkins, at one point, your opinions about the phenomenon diverged, and you went kind of a bit away from the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and we wanted to know if that you bet something relationship-wise with Hopkins.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate what happened between me and Bud Hopkins because I had great respect for him, but he was convinced that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was the truth, that it is definitely these people are from another planet. But I don't see any proof of that. I admit it seems possible in some ways, but in other ways it really doesn't. And specifically, the distances are so great that you just have to wonder about how anyone could travel all that distance. And the other thing is that they seem not, I just don't feel, they seem to know too much about us. It's a very strange situation because they know so much about us and yet don't. They're very clumsy in their relationships with us. So my thought is you have to keep the question open as to what they are. And Bud didn't like that. He didn't approve. He felt we should pursue the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and we did sort of have a falling out,
Well,
sadly.
We both do agree with you about leaving the question open. so
Yeah,
much.
because we have to. We don't know what this is. It's very important. Very important.
Oh, also, another question, because we were wondering the other day, those beings, did they have hair on the heads?
I don't remember. I've been asked that before, and I just don't remember. It couldn't have been much, or I would have noticed it. I just don't recall.
Okay.
Bueno, diré que él comentó una ocasión que de todas las cartas que recibió de gente que había tenido experiencias similares a la suya, solamente una o un par de ellas hacían referencia precisamente a lo del pero, que era lo.
Vale. Okay, we were asking because once you said in one of the letters you got from these people that were writing you after the publishing of the book, you commented that only one or two mentioned that those beings they saw had hair. And you were kind of implying that the ones you saw had hair also. On the...
Oh, no, I wasn't intending to imply that.
Okay.
I did see, I did see somewhat. I just don't remember very clearly now. It's been too long that I haven't thought about this in a long time. It's not a question I get often. But there may have been something to do with hair at some point. Something quite funny, as I recall. I saw someone wearing what looked like a cheap wig.
Okay.
That I believe I remember that at some point in my experience. But as I say, I haven't thought about it in a long time.
All right.
I didn't see them. But there are other people who have seen that they had this sort of thin hair and maybe sort of a white fuzz of hair.
White.
White or thin black hair, perhaps. Well, see, it's entirely bald.
Él comentaba que también que el artista se tomó cierta licencia.
Okay, you said at some point that the artist that made that picture of the gray alien, you said that he kind of went like a bit creative or artistry, and it wasn't
No,
exactly.
I sat with him while he made this, and the head is bigger, but the eyes are like that. They're very appalling. I mean, if you see this in person, it's one thing to see a picture. You see eyes like that in person, and it is shocking. Shocking.
One can only can guess. Well, also I wanted to ask you, because in some of your writings, you've said that these beings were able to detach the human soul from the physical body, and you've touched upon the concept of soul recycling. So could you please explain a bit more?
Well, I think this whole thing is about the soul.
Okay.
I don't think it's so much about the physical part of us. And in fact, after I had my experience, before I had written that book, I was telling friends about it, and they were all saying, well, maybe it was an out-of-body experience, not a physical experience. I knew that wasn't true, but I wouldn't tell them I had been raped. I wouldn't talk about it. But I got a book from a man called Robert Monroe, who specializes in helping people figure out how to get out of their bodies. And I did that successfully once. And I did come out of my body. And it was an absolutely real experience, and it was very clear. I could see the bed with my wife sleeping in it and my body beside it, everything. And I went around the room. I went out through the window, right through the wall, which had a slight resistance to it, but it was still, and I could see the trees around the house, and they all had a sort of shimmering electrical field around them. It was very beautiful. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go further the next time, but I'm going back in this time because I'm, not in my body. And I thought, how do you get back? And I had no idea. And so I sort of tried to lay down in my body, and it was like slick inside, and I kept falling out of it. And I thought, my God, I've killed myself by fooling around with this. Now I'm dead. And what a horrible thing for Anne to wake up in the morning with a dead body beside her. And it worried me so much, I found myself back in my body. And I've never been able to get out like that again since. But I also will never forget it. And I know that that is real. It is real. In fact, I went to Robert Monroe's Institute in West Virginia. I had the proofs, the galley proofs of my book of communion before it had still not been published. And I gave him the book to read. And after the next day, he said, you know, you're going to get in a lot of trouble over this book. And I thought, what can he mean? But it turned out to be true.
Dime.
Él llegó a imaginar el impacto del libro.
Did you ever conceive the impact of your book was going to be that huge?
I never had the slightest idea. No.
Never.
I never did. I never had a bestseller that big. Few people ever have. And I was stunned. The publishers were hopeful about the book, but they didn't know it would sell like that either.
¿Y sobre el film? ¿La película?
And about the movie?
Well, the movie was a different story. It wasn't as successful as the book. It didn't make any money. The distributor failed right away, and they didn't get the movie out much, and so it's not been much of a success. There's some parts of it that are pretty good, but it could have been better. If they'd had more money to make the movie properly, it would have been better. So,
I wanted to touch upon any specifics, maybe encounters or evidence or something you saw. What led you, or how do you tie the soul recycling? How do you go to that conclusion, basically, of the soul recycling? I mean,
I'm not understanding. I'm sorry.
yeah, about the soul recycling.
Oh, yeah.
How did you
Well,
go
it's a
there?
speculation.
Okay.
I speculate that they've got something to do with souls, because they seemed very interested in that. And they used to come up to the cabin, and the children would be there, and they would shine lights on the children and tell them that they were looking at their souls. And the children called them little doctors and soul doctors. And they weren't. And I told all of our friends that this was happening. You know, I said, people are coming to the cabin, and they'll come when your children are here as guests of my child, my son. And everyone said, oh, that's all right. We don't mind. And so the children came, and they did come to see the children. And that was convincing me that this was something to do with the soul. And I became very interested in the condition of the soul and what my soul and every soul is like, and how do you make a good soul, and how do you maybe get to the point where you don't end up being recycled again, or worse. I mean, you know, because I think that the ancient Egyptians had a lot of wisdom about souls, and they thought that the soul, the better the life, the lighter the soul. And if a soul could be weighed against a feather and not be heavier than the feather, then it would ascend, returning to Orion, to the stars of its origin. Excuse me. And otherwise, it would stay here and eventually return to life, or it would sink away and be consumed, eaten by Anubis, the dark god. And they have, in Egyptian moral life, they had the 42 laws of Ma'at. And if you read these laws, they're very much like what eventually became the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments are like a condensed version of the 42 laws of Ma'at.
I wanted also to ask you, because some have suggested that these encounters may have spiritual or metaphysical dimensions. And so, can you share your thoughts on the potential spiritual implications of these experiences?
This has tremendous spiritual implications. It's about the spiritual journey, ultimately. And it's about a new kind of mankind, because when you get involved with the visitors, you soon also get involved with our own dead. And the souls of the dead become part of your life again. My wife, Anne, was very, very capable and understood this deeply. And she passed away in 2015, but she did such a remarkable job of showing after she died that she was still here, that I wrote a book about it called The Afterlife Revolution. Because she was the one, she came out of her office one day while working on the letters and said, "Whitley, this is something to do with what we call death." And I'll tell you a story. A man called my agents, this was back before the internet, when it was quite hard to get a hold of someone like me. It's easy now, but it was hard then. And he was frantic to get a hold of me and talk to me. And my agent called me and said, "He sounds so desperate, you need to talk to him." So I called the man. He turned out to be a government airline inspector, and he lived in Georgia. And he said, "I want to know, I'm going to tell you something that happened. I want to know if you have any reason to believe it's true." Our little boy came running downstairs the other night saying, "Mommy, Daddy, Mommy, Daddy." My brother, his older brother, was in my room with these little men, and he told me to tell you that he was all right. They'd just seen this big light go across the sky. And just before this happened, and he said, "I want to know, Mr. Strieber, do I have any reason to believe my son?" It turns out his older son had died the week before in an auto accident. And I said, "Yes, you do." Because we already had seen so many letters from people saying, my dead mother or someone like that was with them. And then when they began to come to our cabin to meet our friends, which we would bring up to the cabin, it almost always was true that a dead person who was beloved of one of the friends would come before the visitors showed up. And every time that happened, Anne would say, "They'll be here later tonight." And it was always true. So there's some kind of connection there. And I think this is mostly happening on the level of the soul. I think that what's happening in the physical world is only incidental to what's happening in the bigger world, which is the world of the soul.
Él habla en este libro de un concepto muy interesante que es la frontera de la realidad, que es donde le lleva su experiencia. ¿Qué lugar es ese ahora en 2023 para él?
Okay, in your book, you said something about the phenomenon related to the limits of reality. What does that mean to you now in 2023?
Well, what it means to me now is that we do not yet have any idea what reality is. We don't even know if this is actually happening. And I'll tell you a simple truth that any neurologist would agree with. We don't know what's outside. We only know what our brains are telling us is there. We have no direct contact with the world around us at all. We only have contact with what our brains are telling us. And it's not difficult to go from there to realizing that someone can probably control very much what you perceive, and that's quite true. In fact, we can do it. There have been lots of experiments with people. For example, people can be convinced that they committed crimes that they didn't commit. They can be convinced of this. That's been proven scientifically. So where I am right now is I am in the wonderful position of not knowing where I am, which is beautiful because it opens you up to all sorts of possibilities. Another thing that my very wise wife said, the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. I live by that and I love it.
Really good answer. Really good.
¿Cómo encaja esto que acaba de contar con la realidad física del fenómeno? Por ejemplo, cuando ha comentado algo sobre la posibilidad de la materialidad del fenómeno.
No te he entendido sobre Roswell, ¿has dicho?
Sí, cuando él habla de Roswell, ha hablado de las repercusiones de lo que va más allá de todo lo que nosotros comprendemos, de una cosa que científicamente se está demostrando, esas barreras de la nueva realidad. Pero, ¿y cómo está en todo esto, por ejemplo, el tema?
Vale, ya te entiendo. So, we were speaking about the limits of reality, but we also have a really big physical aspect with it, which is Roswell. So, how do you tie what it means to you to be in the limits of reality but have an Roswell incident as well?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. My uncle, my brother's brother, and his close friend, Arthur Exon, were both military officers at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, when the bodies and the debris were brought in from Roswell. They were in the Air Materiel Command, which is where the material and the bodies were brought. He was a colonel then, but he died as a general. Exon held one of the bodies in his arms. And he said to me, it was like a big insect, 4 feet long. That's how.
Si eso es antagónico o complementario a esa frontera.
Oh, you feel that goes against, or does it complement this thing about the frontier, the limit of reality?
I think that they have a different relationship to reality than we do because their brains are different. Therefore, their perceptions are different. And that's why these huge eyes have such an effect on us, because they are seeing the world differently. And we do not see it the same way. And I think that they see the soul with their physical eyes. And we instinctively know that when we are with them. And it's something that we do not ever see. And then suddenly someone can see your soul and you can feel them inside you. You can feel their presence inside you in some way that is very,
when
very...
When you look at who is it? When you look into their eyes, you feel you're being trespassed or something?
You feel that they're, you might look into their eyes, but they're looking into your soul with those same eyes. And you feel that. You feel it very strongly.
Y para concluir, la frontera de la realidad, ¿esa realidad es estable o nosotros la podemos modificar?
Is this reality and the limits of it, are those stable or can we modify them?
I don't know the answer to the question, but I strongly suspect that reality is different for different beings. That I think that the reality a capuchin or a little or a gorilla or a dolphin sees is very different from what we see. And I think that the visitors' perceptions must be radically different from ours. It's all the same world, but the way we take it in is completely different. Well, for example, we know that the dolphins have a complex language. We can't understand a word of it, even though we've lived on the same planet all of our evolutionary History is here, side by side, in effect. We know elephants have a language. We don't know how they speak. We know capuchins have a complex society and language. We don't know anything about it because we can't get into their minds. And these other beings from some other reality, goodness only knows how far apart we are.
Y la manifestación de la realidad puede utilizar factores socioculturales para que nosotros la comprendamos y la decodifiquemos. La manifestación de la realidad.
The manifestation of this reality, can we use, or does it affect any social factors of ours that we can use to comprehend and decodify, to crack the code, basically? You think we're going to ever be able to?
You know, I'm writing a book about that now. I've just started because I think it's the key question. Will we ever be able to make sense of this? That's really what you're asking. And it's going to be a great challenge. And if we do make sense of this, it will be, I think, the greatest achievement of the human mind in the history of the species.
¿Alguna otra? Porque voy a ir cerrando. Okay, last question, we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much, sir. Now, what is your opinion on the current state of ufology, and how has it evolved since you first began writing about it?
Ufology is becoming far more sophisticated than it was. It was just basically a business about a little aliens and flying saucers coming around, but it's a much bigger story now. Many people are realizing that it has this relationship with our visitors has many dimensions, and most of them are not yet explored. And the ufology community is trying to learn how to explore.
Amazing, sir. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Yeah.